Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be looking into the spiritual significance of Benjamin Netanyahu winning a record fifth term in office, and we'll also be discussing what significance does President Trump's peace process hold for the nation of Israel. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guest is all the way from Israel, and that is David Silva from Out of Zion Ministries. David, warm welcome back to the programme.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be back at Revelation, Simon.
And David, do you want to share with us something of your recent tour to the UK this year and some of the places that you've been and what you've experienced?
Yeah, well, the most significant event was we led a Passover Seder in Taymouth Castle, which is a really flash castle up there northwest of Perth in Scotland. So that was fantastic. We did a seminar there the next day, and then we've been moving back through the UK down Durham, Darlington, Leeds, across to Manchester, North Wales, and now we're in London for tonight and off to Israel a little bit later on.
And I'm so pleased that you could fit us in your busy schedule. Really
yeah,
pleased.
Well, I like to be able to get out and reach the people that can't come to the meeting, so it's good.
And David, do you want to share a little bit about your ministry, Out of Zion Ministries, and the heart that God's given you to reach out to the Christian world and to also unite them with Israel?
Mm-hmm. Sure, we've been living in Israel for 26, 27 years, and the Lord used Isaiah 2 verse 3, which begins by saying, "Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord," to convince my wife that we should be going to Israel. And then 3 or 4 years later, he showed me the last part of that verse, which says, "For out of Zion shall go forth the word of the Lord and the Torah from Jerusalem." So basically for 26 years, 27 coming up, I've been traveling the nations, and really my primary objective used to be just educating the church about their Romans 11-based relationship with Israel and the Jewish people. Ephesians 2, 11 through 19 finishes up by saying the grafted in part of the church are no longer aliens or foreigners, but fellow citizens. Now, that still is a major part of our ministry, but really our primary motivation right now is to raise the level of prayer and intercession for Israel. But having said that, again, originally because I was concerned about what was happening there in and around, the Middle East. We live on top of Mount Carmel. Hezbollah is entrenched in Lebanon, only 20 miles away, and they've got 150,000 rockets and missiles, they say, these days. So I needed to be out there making sure we had a lot of people praying for us. But then the Lord showed me, really, he's going to save Israel anyway. And, being right with Israel is really more of a concern for the nations and for the United Kingdom, seeing we're here, because God's going to judge. I believe God's going to judge the nations, and already is, on account of how they behave towards Israel and the Jewish people. So it's very important.
Excellent. And can you share with us the prayer centre that you're building and why there is such an urgent need to step up prayer and intercession for Israel at this time?
Okay. Well, we attend Carmel Assembly on top of Mount Carmel, and we do have a prayer cave underneath, but we also have a vision for establishing prayer houses all the way along the top of Mount Carmel. Now, Mount Carmel is not an up and down mountain, it's a long range. It takes a good hour probably to drive along the top of it. So we have 2 or 3 prayer and worship watches during the week. My wife leads one from 2 to 4 on Tuesday afternoons, and people are very welcome if they're coming. In fact, we ask people to come and pray with us. There are 2 or 3 other ones through the week, and of course 24/7 would become the optimum. In Jerusalem there are 5 or 6 24/7 prayer houses covering all the directions, but we believe that Mount Carmel is very, very strategic, because obviously the ultimate target of the enemy is Mount Zion in Jerusalem. But in the Bible, there's something about the north in the spiritual realm, and most of Israel's battles happened from Mount Carmel north, and obviously the army, or the government and the army, understand it, because up on the Golan Heights is a really, really large military installation all the way across the Golan Heights. So they understand that the northern border with Lebanon and Syria is the first line of defense but for Jerusalem. But what we believe is basically it's a spiritual war, and there needs to be a spiritual first line of defense. Again, protecting Jerusalem, but being up there on the northern border and pushing back that attack that will come from the north. So at the moment, in the village where our congregation is, there's a Australian New Zealand prayer house. There's 2 Korean prayer houses. A German friend of mine has an apartment which is a prayer house overlooking Haifa Port. So that's the city covered. But our vision is to fill the whole mountain with international prayer houses. So we're just waiting for someone or a group in the United Kingdom to catch the vision and run with it. So either to rent an apartment and turn it into it would be like a spiritual embassy prayer house. Also, you can use it as a base for when they come to Israel. And if anybody's interested, if some of the listeners like that catches their attention, they can contact me or contact my wife, and we can share more about that.
Excellent. So be able to find out all the information from the website. The last few months, David, have been very interesting in Israel, particularly as the news has been dominated by the general election in Israel, in which Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has won an historic 5th term in office, 4 consecutive election victories he's had, and that's a kind of consecutive 10 years in power, going on to become Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister. What do you think the secret of his success is?
Well, I think the primary secret is I think he's God's man. His name is Benjamin, son of the right hand, Netanyahu, gift from God. So just his name kind of declares that it looks like God's favor is definitely upon him. But, as much as a lot of the Israelis don't like him, of course, the liberal left-wing media don't like him. He's been good for Israel security-wise. Even though he may not be a totally Bible-believing man, I think he knows what's written in the Bible. He has Bible studies at home and in his office. His daughter is a religious Jew. His son won the Israel Bible knowledge quiz, so I'm sure the Netanyahus talk about the Bible at their Shabbat table on Friday evenings. And I think something inside of him knows that it's really wrong to give away God's land, as much as international pressure is upon him to do that. So he's been great security-wise. He's been great trade-wise. He doesn't send the trade and industry minister out. He goes out on international tours and drums up trade. And also he's been, improving Israel's diplomatic situation in the nation. So all around, we think he's been a great prime minister. And obviously, we were a bit concerned, because of all of the charges against him, and a lot of people don't like him. We thought, well, the chances of him winning again was slim, but as we know now, he did. And again, I think it's just evidence that God's hand is upon him.
So let's have a look at this news report in which this media report outlined that Benjamin Netanyahu is King Bibi.
King.
An incoming tide delivered Benjamin Netanyahu the chance once more to form a government. Delia Suiza couldn't be happier.
The security is good and the economic is good, and today is my birthday, as it's a very good present for me. Thank you, David.
The wave of change facing Netanyahu was powerful, but not enough. As Tel Aviv absorbed the prospect of his 5th term, Omer Rosen wasn't happy.
Netanyahu is not the big problem. The big problem is now the older religious people that really have a lot of power, especially when they force their ideology on us. So for us, the religious people that Netanyahu is taking with him is the big problem.
Overnight, political fortunes churned. First, Benny Gantz and the Blue and White Party prematurely boasted they'd won, followed in the wee hours by a Likud victory party. By morning, the parties were tied with 35 seats each, but that is not the only key to governing. The path to power here at the Knesset is complicated. With no one party gaining a clear majority of the 120 seats, Israel's president will now ask one of the leading parties to try to form a viable coalition government, and negotiations could take weeks. It's likely the nod will go to Netanyahu. Political analyst Delia Shaindlin.
I mean, it's extraordinary in the sense that he's been re-elected now 5 times. I think that's the really striking part of it. We're looking at about 26% who voted for him, according to the current tally. That's not a majority. This is not, somebody sweeping the Israeli public.
So now what? The Prime Minister still faces possible indictment on corruption allegations, which he denies. And will he pick up on a dramatic last-minute campaign promise to annex Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank?
Netanyahu, by some accounts, wants to move very fast to nowhere in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I don't know if he will speed up towards formal annexation, despite his promises.
Palestinians expect a new result just reflects the old. Netanyahu's lead, he says, confirms they don't want peace. The day after, Israelis seem relieved or resigned, not hugely surprised, taking a breath before politics churns up here once more. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Tel Aviv.
And to win 5 election victories, you deserve the right to be called King Bibi. David, what was so extraordinary about this election campaign is that he was behind in the polls with the emergence of this new centrist party called the Blue and White Party, led by former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz. Doesn't that reflect that something's changing in Israeli politics, that the centre-left have to move more towards the right, and that they need generals and chiefs of staff on security to give them any credibility to a chance to actually win over what is a very sceptical Israeli public?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, at the best of times, Israeli politics is very fickle and very divided. This time it was terrible. Everybody was swapping, you know, who they were standing with. And obviously, I think for most Israelis, security is probably number one, and so it should be. And then I would guess the financial situation, and even our own kids were kind of a bit concerned because it's difficult for young people to make it. But there has been a shift, and it's interesting because in America, most of the young Jewish people have turned really left and to the liberal side. But here in Israel, and it's what gave Bibi his win, is that a lot of the people of voting age from 18 onwards have actually turned more right-wing. So blue and white sounded good, but I just think people realised they just didn't have enough, enough confidence in Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid to trust them to the point of voting them in. So it was very close, of course, and sadly, it calls for a coalition for Bibi to be able to form a government, and the major coalition partners will be the religious parties who we Messianic Jews don't like so much because they make it very difficult for us. But then, we shouldn't actually vote for what's really good for us personally. We really need to vote for what's good for the country, but of course not everybody sees it that way. So most people voted for what they saw as was good for them, but security and then the financial situation being the main dynamics.
And David, can you also share what Bibi Netanyahu has done for Christians? Because he really has reached out to Christians around the world, and he realises that the underbelly of support for President Trump is from born-again Christian supporters of Israel in the States. And there's that recognition that the Christians are playing a big part. And so he's been able to utilise that, hasn't he, with his very effective communication skills, and by far the most articulate spokesman that Israel's had for over a generation.
Yeah, and Bibi, I think for a long time he's understood that, Christian Zionists are Israel's really our only friends out there in the nation. So he's got close relationships with people like Mike Evans and Pastor John Hagee, and perhaps others, maybe even Pat Robertson, and the Daystar television people as well. They're all very closely connected to Bibi, and we have this coalition of Christians and Jews, which I think have a place in the Knesset. So he really has made a way for there to be some Christian input into the situation there in Israel. So it's good news. It's just it'd be nice if Messianic Jews were a little bit more accepted as well.
Any chance you can see a party being formed that would make up or represent the Messianic Jewish community? Because clearly your numbers are growing in Israel. Yeah. So it's only a question of time before you actually have your own political party at some point.
Yeah, well, there was actually a Messianic Jewish candidate in the election, from what I was told. The problem is with all of that is, as I said a few minutes ago, the religious are holding the balance of power. They really, really hate us. So, but he needs them for his coalition to stand.
And in terms of why Bibi has been so successful, isn't it because also that that the Israeli electorate don't trust the peace camp anymore? Those parties or candidates that offer land for peace haven't been elected since Ehud Barak back in '99. So we're looking at 20 years really since an Israeli candidate stood as prime minister and got elected on that mandate of land for peace.
Well, we've still got groups like Peace Now who are very active, but and most Israelis that's what they really want is peace. But I think after the Gaza withdrawal and we still get rockets, and just the fact that there's been no positive movement at all, really, I would say actually negative movement with the with the Palestinian Authority, with Mahmoud Abbas. I think most Israelis have become realistically pessimistic of any hope for peace, and so we know that we need to have a strong government. Particularly, actually, I would say, Israelis really do keep. I'm not sure what the people in Britain are like, but Israelis watch the news. If you go out to the mall on Fridays and everybody's got big thick newspapers, they really watch what's going on because it's in their it's in their own best interest and for the safety of their family. And I think most Israelis understand that Iran is really our main concern. Iran is funding Hezbollah, Iran is funding Hamas, and arming them, and also constantly calling for our destruction. And praise God, Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump are the only politicians in the world who are standing up to Iran. So I think that also had an advantage for Prime Minister Netanyahu, which brought about his win, was that concern about what Iran was up to.
So let's have a look now and this excellent video that shows why Bibi Netanyahu won his last election victory.
We return to Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu's apparent victory. John Yang is covering the election for us, and tonight he's in Tel Aviv.
After a nail-biter of a night that saw both Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his challenger, retired Army General Benny Gantz, declare victory, Israelis awoke this morning to near final results showing Netanyahu's Likud party and Gantz's blue and white, both center-right, each winning 35 seats in the 120-member Israeli legislature called the Knesset. But including the seats of minor parties aligned with Likud, Netanyahu appears to have a clear advantage of as many as 65 seats, a majority. And late today, Gantz conceded defeat.
Total victory for Netanyahu.
Aluf Ben is editor-in-chief of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz.
There is not enough Netanyahu fatigue. Obviously, all those who voted for Gantz and for left-wing parties, they voted to oust Netanyahu. But it wasn't enough to make him leave his job.
President Trump was among the world leaders offering congratulations.
So the fact that Bibi won, I think we'll see some pretty good action in terms of peace.
In the streets of Tel Aviv today, voters engaged in a national pastime, expressing their opinions. Bike store manager Ronan Friedman voted for Netanyahu.
I feel that something great was done in Israel. The public has spoken.
So did Roni Shvili.
Lama.
I'm glad about the outcome because I think Bibi is doing an amazing job.
Psychotherapist Talia Haim voted for the once powerful Labor Party, which was aligned with Gantz.
I'm really upset. I'm really sad. I think that we really needed a change, and it's a shame that once again it's staying the same.
Software engineer Shahar Weider voted for Gantz and holds out hope for Netanyahu's coalition partners.
I would like the coalition to be people who care about the country, meaning leaving the right and left wings and the extremists out, and probably the Hasidic Jews as well.
The election gives Likud its biggest share of Knesset seats since 2006. Analysts say that simplifies Netanyahu's coalition building and makes his government relatively stable, since a single minor party will not be able to bring it down. Analysts say re-election allows Netanyahu to say he has a mandate to fight looming corruption charges.
He can argue that the Israeli public, knowing what the charges are, knowing what he supposedly did to break the law, despite that, voted to keep him in office. In other words, keeping Netanyahu in office is more important than enforcing the white-collar criminal law on the country's top politician.
Following Netanyahu's pledge to begin annexing the West Bank, the results highlight the Israeli public's rejection of the two-state solution to the Palestinian conflict. Tal Schneider is diplomatic correspondent for the Israeli financial newspaper Globes.
So we keep hearing the two-state solution coming from European allies and from the United States, but if you start to talk to the people on the streets, they will tell you, most of them, we do not believe in a Palestinian state ever.
Trump administration officials say they will release their peace plan soon. While Israeli voters kept their prime minister, they also gave a platform to a new leader fighting against him. The results represent a significant achievement for Gantz, a first-time candidate, and thrust his new party into the role of the opposition. The role of opposition leader could be a new and unfamiliar one for Gantz, who was Netanyahu's army chief of staff.
It's not an easy task for someone with zero experience in politics. He was in the military, where you reach your goals through giving orders, not through negotiations like in politics.
Imagine to yourself he has two chief of staff with him, like two other former chief IDF. One was also a defense minister. And this respectable, honorable group will just have to start writing bills and laws from bottom up. And it's not going to be, I mean, it's going to be fun for reporters because they're going to make lots of mistakes, but it's not going to be easy for them.
For now, Netanyahu is headed to a fifth straight term as prime minister and poised to soon surpass founding father David Ben-Gurion as the longest-serving Israeli leader ever. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang in Tel Aviv.
And politics is always colourful in Israel. David, the next agenda I think I very much want your insight in, and that is on President Trump's recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan, which he announced back in March, which was a real election gift for Benjamin Netanyahu. What prophetic significance does this hold?
Well, of course, the Golan Heights is a part of covenanted biblical Israel. And I think what's happening is God is in the process of giving the land back as part of his covenant promises in preparation for the reestablishment of his kingdom. So all these things that we see happening in and around the Middle East and really around the whole world, it's all end time stuff. And the word of God is coming to pass. And God is doing what he said he would do. So I believe it really does have a strong political and spiritual significance. I don't know what President Trump's motivation was. Maybe it was just to give Netanyahu a gift. Maybe he's just wanting to get in the face of our enemies. But President Trump, not being a politician, of course, is thinking business. What's good for business, what's good for finances as well. I'm not sure that he's thinking spiritually at all. But, the Bible says that the heart of the kings is in the hand of God, and he turns it like a river. So God is having his way no matter what the politician's motivation is. It's God doing what he wants to do.
And President Trump is the first US president in over 50 years that has actually recognised Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and the Golan is so strategically important for Israel, and it's important for Israel's water, and of course the agriculture there as well. So, this is a real gift on behalf of the United States to actually recognise this. And sadly, the British government and also the European Union heavily criticise President Trump's move in recognising Israeli sovereignty over the Golan. But if Israel were to enter into peace negotiations with Syria, who could Israel negotiate with an ongoing civil war going on, 80,000 Iranian troops on Israel's border, the presence of Hezbollah, ISIS and Russian forces right on Israel's border? Surely that would just be crazy.
Yeah, and even this week, we've seen Russian warships, Russian aircraft carriers coming into the Mediterranean. So, Russia being heavily entrenched in southern Syria as well, and in the Mediterranean, and America coming in, really the whole Middle East situation is boiling up to a possibility of an outright war, which would then affect the whole world. with oil supplies being cut, and just anything could happen in the next few months, really, I believe. So it pays to watch what's happening there in the Middle East.
Absolutely. So let's look at this video now, in which the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to name a town or a community after President Trump, after recognizing Israeli sovereignty in the Golan.
All Israelis were deeply moved when President Trump made his historic decision to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And therefore, after the Passover holiday, I intend to bring to the government a resolution calling for a new community on the Golan Heights named after President Donald J. Trump.
Those are comments from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a family trip to Golan Heights Tuesday. He said he'll introduce a resolution for the proposed name to the government soon. Here's a bit of context. The U.S. and the UN saw Golan Heights as an occupied Syrian territory for the last 50-plus years. Israel took it from Syria in the Six-Day War of 1967 and annexed it in 1981. The move wasn't ever recognized by world leaders. President Trump signed a proclamation officially recognizing Israel's sovereignty over Golan Heights in March. Syria's foreign ministry said Trump's move was a blatant attack on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Netanyahu didn't give any hints what the community's name would be.
There we go. Well, we're all guessing to know what that community is going to be called. We'll probably end up building a couple of towers, and it ends up being Trump Towers up on the Golan. David, what also struck me in the process of putting the programme together, which you informed me, which I didn't know about, was the record number of rains that Israel's had. And Israel recently just celebrated Passover, or Pesach, in which this was the coldest April for 15 years in Israel, with flooding as well. What significance does this huge amount of rainfall have upon Israel?
Well, I think there's one really ultimate significance, which I'll come to in a minute, but we've been there for 26, 27 years, and it is one of the wettest winters we've had. And in fact, the whole Middle East really got a lot of rain this year. And what happened was, a few weeks ago, my wife started noticing these butterflies all over the place. She said, "Oh, David, there's a lot of butterflies flying around." And later on, we found out that I think it was 1 billion butterflies stopped off at Israel on their migration route. And the reason why there were so many butterflies is because it had rained all over the Middle East, and of course there was many more larvae, and the butterflies, they hatched into butterflies, and then they came to Israel. And because it had rained so much in Israel, there was a lot of vegetation and flowers for them to eat and fuel up on. So they just came in for 24 hours. They came in, they ate, and they fueled up, and they took off again. But the real significance is the records show that when there are record numbers of rain, or a record rainfall in Israel, particularly the Aliyah, the number of Jews immigrating the following summer goes up. So I think that really is the significance, because again, particularly for Revelation viewers, hopefully we're all waiting for the Lord to return very quickly, very soon. Part of the requisite for the return of the Messiah, according to Acts 3:21, is all the prophecies be fulfilled. And one of those prophecies is that from Ezekiel 36, 8 to 10, that all of the Jewish people, or the vast majority of them, will be back in the land. So again, part of my wife Josie's ministry, she has a separate ministry called Intercessors for the Restoration of Israel, and her primary focus is having Christians pray for the Jewish people to return home. So we just watch and see what happens over the next summer, but we're expecting a record amount of Aliyah. And of course, practically, the amount of Jews coming back is always, or it can be, related to the amount of terrorism or the persecution that's going on out there in the world. So as we know as well, there's a major increase of persecution and attacks against Jewish people in the nations.
But also, it's extremely significant to see that the Kinneret, also known as the Sea of Galilee, levels have been rising this winter, because 20 years ago, it was looking very precarious for
just last year, we've been in drought for 6 to 7 years. I remember back when we first got there in summer of 1991, 92, the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, was actually over its banks, flowing onto the boardwalk there at Tiberias, but we've had just years of drought where there was one or two good winters, but the last 6 or 7 drought. I actually went to baptise a number of believers from London in the Kineret like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was significantly higher. It's come up 2 or 3 metres, and we've still got the snow. We've still got the water that's still seeping through, but we've got all the snow up there on Mount Hermon yet to melt, so it could come up another metre. So it won't quite reach what they call the full level, but it really has significantly raised the level of the Sea of Galilee.
I know it's an obvious question, but for those living in Israel, but for us living in the UK, it's not. Why is water such a precious commodity in Israel?
Well, we live in Israel, and the Middle East really is a desert because of the weather patterns. Israel only produces the amazing fruit and vegetables that we produce because we found a way to deliver water precisely to the plants. And in times past, it has been, they said that water could be more of a cause for a war than the oil in the Middle East. But at the same time, while the water levels were low and the rain levels were low, Israel went ahead and manufactured these huge desalination plants. So even without the rain, we're getting enough water now from the desalination plants. But still, it's good to have that supply of fresh water on hand.
So let's have a look at some of the extraordinary weather that Israel had over Passover.
Hail and flooding plagued not Egypt but Israel as Passover began. It's been Israel's coldest, wettest April in 15 years, said meteorologists. Police rescued 3 fishermen in the Galilee swept from shore. The Nature and Parks Authority closed hiking trails and parks. The Sea of Galilee water level rose, a good sign after years of drought. As Passover ends, the weather is expected to grow sunny and warm. This is Benjamin Netanyahu reporting for the Jerusalem Post.
And that gives a little bit insight into the weather. And one thing I know about being in Israel, weather is never really an issue because all the time the weather is pretty much the same consistently, just very hot and hot. So, for actually the Israelis to be talking about the weather, I think is very significant. But on to something which is very, very significant. And at the current time of the recording of this program, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is in the process of putting together his coalition government, in which once he has his government in place, it's expected that the US administration will unveil its deal of the century, the so-called peace process plan, which the architect is Jared Kushner. What do you make of this potential plan to bring peace to Israel and the Palestinian Authority and Israel's Arab neighbours?
Well, some people are seeing the fact that Donald Trump's moved the embassy, he's recognised Jerusalem, and now with the Golan Heights, maybe kind of like a carrot to Benjamin Netanyahu, and this peace plan that they're going to announce, I think in June, is it? Yes. May well be something we don't like, something forcing Benjamin Netanyahu to give something that we shouldn't really be giving. But I don't know about that. I just see that that Donald Trump seems to be going in this direction of being on Israel's side and favouring Israel. So really ultimately we'll just have to wait and see. But I actually would be surprised if it would be bad news for Israel. And of course, Donald Trump and Mahmoud Abbas, there's no love lost between those guys. I think the so-called Palestinian Authority has almost lost all hope of any kind of peace with Israel and any help from America, because America seems to be so obviously on favouring Israel's side. So ultimately, we'll just have to wait and see. And I think again, God is in control, and we've seen other leaders who have tried to give the land away for the sake of this false hope of peace. The peace didn't come about. They didn't last very long. They're gone, and Benjamin Netanyahu is still there.
But isn't the danger not so much for Israel, but actually for the United States and for President Trump if he pushes through his so-called deal of the century with his peace plan for the Middle East, that if Israel has to make concessions for what would only be a cold peace at best, this could have serious implications not only for President Trump's re-election but also for the United States' status as the world one and only world superpower.
Yeah, well, that's true, but I'd say the greater danger is a spiritual danger, because God is very clear. He will bless those who bless Israel. Where is it? Joel chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, he says that, when he brings back all of the people, from the dispersion back to Israel, he'll also gather all of the nations of the world into the valley of Jehoshaphat. That means God's judgment. And he says he will enter into judgment, or he says, I will enter into judgment with the nations on account of how they've treated Israel. And he goes on to say, and they divided my land. So, the secular media, the politicians call it occupied territory. Well, it is, that's true, because it's God's land, but it's not illegally occupied, as they often say, because God gave Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob this covenant promise of that land eternally. So Israel is actually legitimately occupying God's own land. And I think, if I'm not wrong, the territory we're talking about here is probably the only land in the entire world where God in the Bible says this land is for this people. So it's not, I don't think it's good news for any nation to go about, cutting and dividing God's land. And really, the sad state of Britain, even we say in Israel, Balagan, the chaos, the chaos concerning Brexit, it could well be God just shaking Britain up, because Britain has forsaken that promise they made back with the Balfour Declaration in 1917.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of shaking going on and a lot of division coming in, and we certainly see that particularly when it comes to Israel and trying to push Israel into a kind of very dangerous position in compromising land for peace, in which Israel's got nothing but terrorism. But the actual awakening of this deal very much seems this could actually be led by the Saudis and the other Sunni Arab states, such as the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Gulf states, who actually recognise that Israel is a great strategic ally now in the Middle East, particularly with the emergence of the Iranian Shia Crescent dominating the region, and how the Palestinian Authority themselves see the conflict with Israel as it was 70 years ago. So they are also out of step with their own so-called Arab brothers, aren't they? And could this play a part in pushing the Palestinian Authority to make concessions for peace?
Well, it could do, but I don't think they ever will, because actually when it comes to this peace negotiation between Israel and the so-called Palestinian Authority, I think both sides know that they're unable to give what the other side wants. So it really is mission impossible. And again, I don't think God's going to allow it, because we're so close to the return of the Lord. I don't think God will allow the land to be given away again. In fact, I think he's going to give us more, because what concerns me personally, of course, because I want to see the Lord come back soon as possible, any backward step concerning Israel and the possession of the land really is delaying the return of the Messiah. And it's interesting also, well, first of all, I think those Arab nations like the Saudis and others, they're more afraid of Iran than they are of Israel. But also, I think they're beginning to realize that Israel is good to do business with. And I just saw in the newspaper yesterday, I think it was, that there's a big trade show, I think, in the United Arab Emirates. And for the first time, Israel has been invited to put in an exhibition. So things are really, really changing on the ground. And those, I think the Arab nations that continue to stand against Israel, particularly the Palestinians, they're going to find themselves really the big-time losers.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this news report produced by I-24 that looks at the unveiling of President Trump's Middle East plan.
I'm Elon Levy standing in for Jeff Smith. Happy Passover. It's billed as the deal of the century, and the Trump administration is taking an age to reveal its Israeli-Palestinian peace plan. In a tantalizing, some might say vague, preview, senior White House advisor Jared Kushner says the plan will not focus on the process of negotiations, but is a bottom-up plan to improve reality on the ground and a robust business plan for the whole region. He added the plan won't be released till after Netanyahu forms a government and after Ramadan, so we're talking June at the earliest. Here's Kushner at the Time 100 summit.
We've studied, all the different past efforts and how they failed and why they failed, and there's been some tremendous work done by the people who have worked on this before us. So we've tried to do it a little bit differently. Normally they start with a process and then hope that the process leads to a resolution for something they have been able to resolve for a long time. What we've done is the opposite. We've done very extensive research and a lot of talking to a lot of the people. We're not trying to impose our will.
And here in the studio is Israeli former Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon. But let's go first to Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, a member of the dormant Palestinian Legislative Council. Dr. Barghouti, previous attempts to bring peace between Israelis and the Palestinians haven't worked. Now Jared Kushner says, maybe let's try something new. You object?
I don't think there is a plan actually for a solution. What Mr. Kushner is saying is very indicative that practically we are not talking about a plan for resolving the problem or even a plan for negotiating resolving the problem. Clearly, this is a plan to, in my opinion, to cover up what Netanyahu's government is doing on the ground. And the most recent acts by the American administration, whether recognition of Jerusalem as a capital of Israel or their position regarding Palestinian rights of refugees, or their position regarding the issue of statehood, are all indicative that this is more of a Netanyahu plan rather than a Trump administration plan.
Well, Dr. Barghouti, let's reserve judgment just for a moment because we don't know what's in the plan. But what we heard from Jared Kushner just now, he's talking about a bottom-up process that would begin with major investment both in the Palestinian economy and the broader Arab region. Surely, if peace is unachievable right now, the Palestinians should welcome with open arms major investment in their economy, no?
No, what Mr. Kushner is talking about is the same old story of economy first and then politics will follow. And an economic solution instead of a political solution was used before by Sharon and Menachem Nelson and the civil administration in 1982-84, and it led to the Palestinian Intifada. There cannot be a solution without ending occupation. There cannot be a solution while settlements continue to grow. In reality, in my opinion, Kushner's plan is nothing but a cover for the Netanyahu's process of consolidating settlements in the occupied territories and the consolidation of a system of apartheid in Palestine.
Danny Ayalon, do you agree with... sorry, Mustafa, just one moment. Danny Ayalon, do you agree with this assessment from Mustafa Barghouti that, in fact, this is just a plan to cover up the expansion of settlements in the West Bank? The Trump administration has no intention of solving the conflict.
Not at all. I don't think that there is any collusion here. I don't think there is any subterfuge in order to undermine the Palestinians or certainly not the region. I think that what Kushner said is that they are shifting paradigms because we've had 26 years now of same old, same old. 4 different presidents tried the same thing and more of it just to run into a wall and break everything in the middle. Ending quote-unquote occupation is not, or getting a political agreement is not just up to Israel. There are 2 in this party, and I think the Palestinians have only themselves to blame that they did not get or did not accept or welcomed Barak's plan in 2000 or Olmert's plan in 2008. The Intifada of 2000 was after this major attempt by Barak. So I think we have to see a different culture among the Palestinians, not to mention, of course, the pay to slay, where they encourage in their legislation terrorists to kill Jews, and of course all the incitement. If if indeed there are not the right elements in order to achieve a long-lasting, comprehensive peace, I think, and this is what the Americans are going to, if you cannot get, everything you want. They say in Washington that the enemy of the good is the excellent. If we cannot get everything, with crossing the T's and dotting the I's, let's get something of a win-win.
A very good report there put together by Israel's I-24. David, now I think we're in the dying sections of the programme, really, so I kind of need to sum up and summarise. Can you share with us the plight of the body of Messiah in Israel and the state of the Messianic Jewish community in Israel?
Well, positively, it's growing slowly. More and more congregations. The only thing I ever changed in my book, which has been around for a little while, is the statistics, because the number of congregations is growing, the number of Messianic Jews in Israel and around the world is growing. My last edition, I had 200 as a number of Messianic congregations in Israel. Some people now are saying it's between 250 to 300, and some of them, have got a good sized congregation. Ours is 250 up on Carmel. I think the big one in Tiberias has 200 or 300. So it is growing. It's growing slowly. We've got we've got two second and third generation Messianic Jews, including our grandchildren, growing up. Great worship coming out of some of the Messianic Jews. On the negative side, again, still is the fact that the religious parties and the legal system sees us as being illegitimate, having changed religion. Now there is a project called We Are Still Jews, and what they are trying to do is they're trying to canvass the political scene and I think also the media to try to change that perception that Messianic Jews are no longer Jews, that we've changed religion, and because that's what loses us our legitimacy to make Aliyah. And there are a few people that have had difficulty making Aliyah because they found out that they were Jewish. So really, if the viewers want to pray for something, pray for the success of this project. Is called We Are Still Jews, and there's a number of people working on that, and some lawyers and some high-level people up in Jerusalem. So it'd be great to have some prayer behind that, because that would, if that goes through, if that was accepted, it would change things dramatically for Messianic Jews around the world to be able to make Aliyah and come back to Israel.
I had your son on the programme last year, Stefan, who served with distinction very, very high up in the Israeli Defence Force, and also took part in the Second Lebanon War against Hezbollah. So surely, if Messianic Jews are full citizens of the State of Israel and also do their military service with distinction, surely that is enough to be patriotic in Israel, unlike many in the kind of extreme religious parties that oppose the Messianic Jewish community in Israel.
I agree, but not in the eyes of the religious, because they are so fanatical about the fact that we, to be fair, because of the sad history of the church's behaviour towards Israel, but they won't see it like that. But again, a lot of the younger people coming into the army and serving with distinction, and if the Lord tarries, which hopefully not, but more and more Messianic Jews will come up into positions of authority. But at the moment, we're just really looking at this We Are Still Jews campaign to really make a difference.
Excellent. And you've also written a book, if our viewers are interested, called A Slow Train Coming.
Yeah, and I wrote that book about 12 years ago, and every now and then I kind of look through it and think I better update it. But I think, no, apart from those statistics of the believers, but what I really do need to change is the title, because it's not a slow train anymore. Really, it's a bullet train. We really are, I believe we really are at the last part of the journey, and the Lord is just looking for the church to get behind the train and give it that last boost down the end of the track in prayer. To complete the journey. So one of the things we like to do is invite all Christians, when they come to the land, come and visit, come and fellowship at a Messianic congregation. They can touch base with myself and my wife, and we'll help them to come to one of the services or the prayer watch. But come, stand with us, pray with us, come and enjoy the great worship that's going on in Israel. Come and make a difference.
Absolutely. And David, how important is it that Christians have an understanding of God's plans and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people, and actually support the Messianic believers in the land?
Well, I believe it's part of the calling, you know, the specific calling. Isaiah 49:22, it says, "Thus says the Lord God, behold, I'll raise up my hand and oath to the nations." We could insert UK in there. "They shall bring my sons in their arms and my daughters on their shoulders." That's a direct call from God to the church in the United Kingdom to help Aliyah, help get the Jewish people home. Romans 11:11, just to invert it a little bit, says salvation has come to the nations, or salvation has come to the United Kingdom to provoke the Jewish people to jealousy. So God again is looking for the church to make the Jewish people jealous, because he wants us all home. As Paul says in Romans 11, one day all Israel will be saved. The church has a massive, massive part to play. And just as really, I guess you could say it's a closing shot warning. You know, most of us, most of the ministries in Israel, we're looking to Asia now, and we believe God is looking to Asia, because most of the church in the West said, we're not interested. Replacement theology teaches that God's finished with Israel, no need to pray. God is now looking to Asia, but it's not too late. It's not too late for the church of the United Kingdom to repent and to begin to stand with Israel and show solidarity with Israel, and most importantly, pray.
Thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report, David. And it's great to have you back in the studio, giving our viewers a very important prophetic update.
Shalom.
Shalom. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. We can see that it's been a very eventful last couple of months in Israel, particularly with the re-election of Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So we need to keep him in prayer, keep his government in prayer, and also pray that this peace process doesn't come into fruition, because we know that if the land is divided, then God divides the United States. And the last thing we need is that happening in the United States to President Trump. So I want to thank you for watching this program, and we'll leave you with a beautiful Messianic worship song sung by the true Messianic believers in Israel. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.